to today's episode of Out of State DMing podcast. I'm your host, lluksblackheart, and today we'll be doing our continuation conversation on skills. Yes, we're doing more skill talk. Uh, yeah, we will be starting off with listen. Wisdom based. It is a wisdom based skill. So those who are like, I suck at hearing things. Well, your listen plays a lot. Well, your wisdom does play a lot into it, and it's relatively simple. Uh, some DMs like to do a passive listen, where if your listen's high enough, you just get to be given informations on your surroundings. I kind of more or less like to do that because it means people aren't constantly rolling for listen checks. Some of the base DCs, for examples, does have that nice list there. Like, if there's a battle happening, the DC drops by 10. So no matter what the DC is or how far away it is, it drops by 10. It's because battles are noisy. People are grunting. They're making sounds when they're being hit. Armor's clanking. Shields and blades slashing each other. Well, slashing. Uh, Hitting into each other's. Spells being cast. Monsters making all sorts of monsterific sounds. And it goes into people talking, not whispering, but talking right there. DC 0. Because it's easy to hear people talking. It's distance that kills you on it, not talking. Um, a person doing a slow pace in medium armor is a 5. An unarmored person walking at a slow pace, which is around 15 feet around, 10. A first level rogue using sneak to past the listener. That's an example because technically speaking, you're supposed to roll that skill. But that's a base example of it. Uh, it. People whispering. Believe it or not, if you are whispering, it's hard to hear you. And for you bards out there who think, like, I'm gonna whisper my song to inspire people, one of the key things is people have to be able to hear you. It's not just a radius; they have to be able to hear you. And if they're making all sorts of no, if the combat's making all sorts of noises, because they're in combat. They're distracted, which gives them a -5 to their check, and then they have to beat that DC 15 just to hear you, and that's not counting distance. A 19, a cat stalking, and a DC 30 for an owl gliding in for the kill. And that's because owls are naturally extremely quiet when they fly. You can pretty much call them the stealth attack fighters of birds because they're just really quiet. Things with a 1, which is people whispering, people talking, is if you beat the DC by 10 or more, you can make out what is being said, assuming that you understand the language. That also somewhat helps because, like, bards, the people have to not because they have to hear and understand what you're saying. If they can't understand you, then the effect doesn't work because they can't. They're like, what is he saying? What is he doing? So it's one of those things that the bard's whispering. Why is the bard whispering? Mixed in with, we don't know what he's saying because he's whispering. So they have to not only, in the midst of combat, beat a DC 15 just to know that you're whispering. They have to beat it by 10 just to be able to understand what you're saying, sprinkled in with the fact that they're technically distracted with a -5. So you're pretty much just making it really, really hard to do it. And that's if you're singing. If you're trying to be quiet while playing an instrument, you're not, or you are playing an instrument, and that goes into, are you making noise or not making noise. So if you're trying to whisper, please don't. Just don't. There is listen modifiers, like right there, listener distracted, -5. Per 10 feet of distance, -1. the and this is for listeners DC, DC modifier. So that they get these brain stop working for a moment. They get these penalties to it to either make it harder for them to pass or not. Uh, why do they have it listed like that? That brainstorm because they have trying to through a door through a stone wall is supposed to make it harder to listen, not easier to listen. So that's not confusing. Not confusing at all. Sometimes D&D does that. I'm not even playing. It goes through examples of what's primarily used for. Which it uses to counter move silently checks. So, for instance, someone roll with a +9, they roll a 10 for a total of 19. That's what you have to. That's a DC you have to beat right there. Is that whopping 19? Actions vary. It can be a reactive response, which may not take much of anything at all, to trying to hear something you failed previously is a move action. But a big thing is that you have to remember, as players and DMs, that that the catch-22, and this is where metagaming comes into it, because your character has no idea that it failed a listen check, just with all the other checks. If it does not know that it failed a check, it cannot attempt to remake the check. A player is aware of it, DM is aware of it, the rest of the table is aware of it, but that does not necessarily automatically entitle them to go, I'm going to actively try again. Because again, your character's not aware that it needs to do the listen check in the first place because it didn't hear anything. So if the DM permits you to do it, great. If a DM goes, why are you trying to hear for something that you don't know is out there? Why? Your character has no idea something's out there for him to do the listen check for, so why is he trying to do it again? The try again primarily primarily goes on someone whispering, trying to overhear someone's conversation. That's what it primarily resides to, because you're trying to hear certain details that are constantly going that you know is happening. Not first something trying to sneak up on you. And now we got the skill move silently. This skill, believe it or not, only actually comes into effect if you're actively moving while trying to move silently. If you're sitting still, you're not moving. It's kind of hard to make noise if you're sitting still. It's pretty much, are you talking? Are you rattling your arms while wearing heavy armor? If no, then you technically don't need to make it. You only really need to make it if you are actively moving. And it's opposed by listen, just like how listen's mainly opposed, used to counter move silently. You move at half your speed. You do take just with hide, you take a -5 penalty if you're moving greater than half your speed, but less than full speed. If you are moving while running or charging, and you're trying to do this, so pretty much moving your actual movement, full movement speed and whatnot, you take a -20 because it's really, really, really hard to be quiet while trying to be fast. It's one of those caveats of a deer walking slowly. It's harder to hear here in the forest than a deer bolting through the forest, because bolting through the forest, it's making a lot more noise. There is also noisy surfaces, such as a bog or undergrowth, are tough to move silently through. When you try to sneak across such a surface, you take a penalty to your move check as indicated below. Excuse me. Noisy, and it gives examples of shallow or deep bogs, undergrowth, dense rubble, scree, is a -2, while very noisy, which is dense undergrowth or deep snow, is a -5. So not very big penalties, but penalties nonetheless. And yes, penalties have a way of easily making you fail off the bat without trying. Action, normally none, because it's part of a move action. That's why I said if you're staying still, you're not making it. It's part of a move action, so it only triggers when you're trying to move quietly. If you're a caster with the cat familiar, you do get a +3 to your move silently checks, because going, yes, I want to be a stealthy wizard, or stealthy sorcerer, which is kind of hard because of spell casting. You have to get a special feat for that to help with that. But having a cat lets you sneak a lot better. There's halflings get a bonus to it. And if you have the stealthy feat, just like with hide, stealthy does increase your move silently by +2. So there is ways to boom. So if you're a halfling sorcerer with the stealthy feat, right there, you're not getting dexterity or ranks or anything. You're getting a whopping +7 right off the get-go. I mean, halflings also get a pretty good hide check, so there's that helps out a lot. The next skill is an extremely simple one. It is trained only. Not everyone can do this because you actually have to have skills in this. Because open lock, it does state trained only right there. The checks completely vary on the locks from a DC 20 to up to a DC 40. So lock quality heavily plays into it, and it gives examples for it, which is a very simple, an average, a good, and an amazing lock. So it's one of those. Okay, that was slightly weird. It is one of those catch-22s of for you DMs out there, is you don't need to have a amazing lock to keep a party member out of opening a lock, because a very simple lock is a DC 20. That's not a low DC. That's a decent DC. And it's one of those things that, unless a rogue splurges everything into it, most of the time they're not going to have an outrageous lockpicking. Because like at level 1, not counting a high dexterity, they're most likely going to have a 4. If they have appropriate feet, it's going to be a +6. So they have to still roll relatively high to open that lock. And if they're continuously getting in the 20s, you can simply, instead of switching to a good or amazing lock where they have to get outrageously high, you can just switch to an average one. It's a DC 25. But you also have to remember that if you want your rogue to actively use open lock, actively put stuff in it, actively actually use one of its rogue skills, they need to actually have wins. Because if they can never, no matter what they do, if they can never open a lock, they're not going to try to open a lock. They're going to rely on other means to get that lock open. You don't particularly want that, because that's how you get players feeling that they're useless, feeling that they can't do anything, feeling down. Because from my experience as a player and a DM, I've seen people with +12s consistently fail to open a simple lock because they're not beating that DC 20. Because they're not rolling high enough. So even with high rolls, that 20 is still a challenge. Well, not high rolls, but even with high modifiers, that DC is still a challenge, because again, they have to get high. It's when the player gets high enough level to where rolling is not it's nonsensical because they're going to automatically beat that 20, which it's not going to be early on. That's going to be late game. Does not counting any tools they have, any miscellaneous modifiers, and or a high dexterity. In order for them to beat that DC without trying, they're going to have to wait till they're at least level 12, because that's at least a plus 15. That's when a DC 20 becomes not so problematic. But at that time, they most likely have Master Thief Schools, which is a plus 2, Defeat, which is another plus 2, and they probably have at least one other thing that's increasing their open lock skill. So around that point, they're not trying anymore because they don't necessarily have to actually roll good. They can roll really low and still beat the 20. It's around that time you should probably think about raising the DC, but that's not early game. That's depending on how you're doing your XP. That's like mid to late game. They're getting to the point where a simple lock isn't a problem. Like, for instance, in one of my current games I'm running, the Rogue has actively failed consecutively a lot of times to open a simple lock. So much so that they damage their thieves tools, because if you fail by 5 or more, the you not only fail, but the lock tools does get damaged, and you can only use it so many times once it's been damaged before it becomes broken. So that's one of the things to remember, that failing by 5 or more, for instance, like getting a 15 or lower, they can easily get messed up. And that simple action, even though they didn't have like a plus 1 or plus 2, they had a decent modifier. That simple of failing multiple times made the player not feel very good. They became self-conscious about it to a point where they didn't want to open locks anymore, because they failed 4 times in a row to open a DC 20 lock. Another party member had to come and use magic to do it, because they couldn't. They failed a lot. It is a full round action. Like I said, there's the feat for it. Nimble does do it. It does note that, again, you can't use it if you're not trained, but you might get it open by using force to open it, which goes to a different section, which isn't a skill section. It's covered by an actual action on page 165, which is smashing an object. But like I said, for you DMs out there, the only reason you need to probably switch locks up is if they're consecutively, constantly, without trying, beating a DC 20. Because you want them to use their skills and be glad that they are a rogue. The next skill is probably going to take a lot of time, depending on how I can properly describe it, and it's Perform. Perform is I have a love-hate relationship for it, because a lot of people don't actually understand what the heck the skill is, because they just assume it's something extremely simple. They like to just go, oh, I have a few points in it, I don't have to put anything more in it. It's like bards. It's one of the reasons why I don't like players who play bards, because they don't actually read. Performance is a key aspect of a bard. Key aspect. Not a minor aspect, not a hearsay. It is a key thing. Why? Because they use their performance to not only maintain their songs, but technically it's when they cast their spells, they're not just, I cast. My brain's up to doing well, because they can cast cure light wounds. They go, I cast cure light wounds. No, they have to. It's performance magic. It's musical magic. So they technically are doing a quasi-perform check to pull it off. They don't technically need to actually roll, but they need to, like, if they're saying it, they're saying it. And their bardic musics not only require you to have X amount of ranks in your chosen performance to actually use them, a lot of them use your performance as the basis for it. Like Countersong that counters verbal spells and verbal effects. When a bard is actively using it to support the bardy against sound-based creatures that use sound attacks, and or spellcasters that are using spells that have a verbal component, their check is used in place of the saving throw. So if someone so someone's going fireball because it has a verbal somatic to it, and the bard's doing his singing a song of "we're gonna dodge this because we're not hitting the dust." The bard, as long as he's maintaining that, his performance check replaces your your reflex saving throw for himself and the entire party because you use whatever's higher. Which, in the fact that with the right stuff, you can easily have with just 1 feat and ranks +6. That's significantly great for everyone across the board because a lot of people aren't going to have a +6 at level 1. Most of the party probably isn't going to have that +6. And that's not counting a charisma. So with a decent roll, you can have a +8. With a perfect charisma roll, you can have a +10. And that's only just taking 1 feat, having a good charisma for it, and putting max ranks into it. There's another feat, skill focus, that does a +3 to it, so they can have an outrageous performance check at level 1. So bards need to almost fixate on it. And do they need to technically hyper focus on just one performance? No, they can mix it up and get different performances. Because yes, each performance is taken separately. There is a list right here you can see. There's acting, comedy, dance, keyboard instruments, oratory, percussion instruments, stringed instruments, wind instruments, and singing. And then it goes into the particular types that fall under that prelude. You do not necessarily have to over specify, because these are examples of what you do when you do it. In fact, for acting, there's comedy, drama, mime. So you can somewhat go act slash comedy. So when you're acting, you're doing comedy. So boom. There's the actual legit comedy, which I don't know why they'd go acting comedy and then comedy in itself. But the difference is like generic comedy versus buffoonery, line rigs, joke telling. So they do somewhat want to separate that. Dancing, there's the jig, the waltz, the ballet. So that is somewhat a little bit more needed to know on what one you're focusing in, but it's also one of those things that, technically speaking, you don't need to specify it. It's only if the DM's being particular. I like being particular. Keyboard is the harpsichord, piano, pipe organs. Oratory is like epic odes and storytelling. Percussion instruments, of course, like bells, chimes, drums, gongs, gong. Just want to double check that for a moment. String instruments, fiddle, harp, lute, mandolin. Because there's a lot that fall under string instruments. Wind instruments, you have flute, panpipes, recorders, shawls, trumpets. Singing is ballads, chants, and melodies. And those are the core examples of what falls under each one. Like I said, in general term, you don't need to be extremely specific with it. You just pick stringed instruments, and you can use stringed instruments because it's considered a broad use for you know how to use all of those things that fall under it, not a specific thing. Even though there's some people out there that will go, a fiddler isn't going to be that good playing a harp. He'll know the general glyphs, but I mean the general gist of it, but he's not a harp player. A harp player is really good with harp, but he's not gonna. Well, they're not gonna be good with the that good with the lute. Same general premise, but they're not. Just they're used to doing this, not this. It's like a guitarist and a bass player. Are they interchangeable? Technically, yes, they can be interchangeable. But I've met people who argue that no, bass players aren't going to make good guitarists, and guitarists aren't going to make good bass players because they're the same, but they're not the same. So there is people out there that will try to do the argument that just because you're good with one does not mean you're good with the other. D&D, in how it likes to be Pacific, it's being Pacifically non-Pacific. So if you know how to play the fiddle, you know how to play the harp, lute, and mandolin. Anything that counts as a stringed instrument, you can use it. And that's not skirting the rules, that's just D&D in a nutshell. You can do performance checks, and these, once you find a place that will permit you to play it, because you can't just randomly play it, just depending on laws of the region or how things go. You can't just become a street performer because you may end up blocking traffic. Guards may escort you away. People may not want you performing whatever you're performing in front of their establishment or their home, or even in their pub. So it's generally good to make sure you're in the clear before you start any of these things. And as it shows on this here, a character can make money off of its performance checks, as long as you're in an actual area that you can do it. Most routine performances, which is a DC 10, can get you a die 10 copper a day. That's not very much, but you also have to remember that most daily commoners don't make the same amount of money that a venturer does just using the basis of trained versus untrained hirelings. Trained hirelings get five silver a day, while untrained get 2 silver a day. That's not very much. It's in silver pieces, not gold pieces. They're not rich. They don't get that much. And that's spent to just keep them alive, mainly. So you're not necessarily going to get ubers upon ubers of money just because you do it. If you want more money, which it does somewhat clarify it, because again, the routine, it does say that try earning money by playing in public is essentially begging. You may be fancy boom, but it's categorized as you're technically begging. An enjoyable performance, which is in a prosperous city. Keywords: prosperous city. So if the place isn't prosperous, as in lack of people actually in it or lack of circulating money, the DM can downgrade it because there's no money to spend. But if you're in the right things, like in a prosperous city, you can earn die 10 in silver pieces, which is significantly more than what you would be earning if you're 10. Because remember, per 10 copper pieces you get is equivalent to 1 silver piece. So getting a 15 or higher gets you somewhere between 1 to 10 silver pieces, which is equivalent to 10 to 100 copper pieces. So you are pretty much making 10 times you normally would with the previous check. Great performance was in a prosperous city. You can end up earning 3 die 10 silver pieces. In time, you may be invited to join a performance troupe and may develop a regional reputation. So if you're beating 20s, there's a good chance that a troupe, probably a traveling troupe of performers, may go, we want you to join our troupe, while at the same time you can end up getting famous. and you may still be going 3 die 10 silver. That's not enough. You're getting paid by the average man, not some willy-nilly rich guy. Because you have to remember, wealth is technically not always distributed evenly, and the most people giving you money for your performance are not the highborn. They're the lowborn mainly. But that's where getting famous and stuff and joining a troupe does somewhat help you, because technically speaking, when you're doing troupe performances, everyone is technically in a way aiding one another. So as long as they're beating, like I said, the HX 10 other, because you have the primary performer, everyone else is chipping in, the chance of the DC going up beating certain things is a lot higher, which means the amount of coin given is a lot higher, which means more coin being distributed between a lot of people, because simply you have a higher chance of beating that DC. If you get a 25 or higher, it becomes memorable in a prosperous city. You can end up earning a die 6 gold pieces, which is really good. Which in time you may come to the attention of noble patrons and develop a national reputation. So instead of it being like, oh, in this region, it's now has a chance of, if you keep beating a 25, it becomes national. So everyone in that nation, like for instance, when you're in the domain of Greyhawk, there's, okay, you're known in this port city over here, but because boom here, everyone throughout the Dominion has a chance of knowing your name, which could actually get you to get actual legit gigs in the Greyhawk proper or in other locations, because now you're a really good, really known performer that people want around. If you can beat a 30, it's considered an extraordinary performance. Again, big thing, in a prosperous city, you can earn 3 die 6 gold pieces a day. In time, you may attract distant potential Patreons or even extra planar beings. Meaning, because there are certain type of entities that love performers. They love bards. They love people who can just do the arts. Like the Linden, which are gorgeous half lady, half snakes with wings that love primarily the harp, but they love performers. So if you can consistently beat a 30, there's a chance that eventually one day you may get one in your audience. And then if you keep it up and they like your performance, they may become a patron of yours, which means they're willing to provide you services for your performance. So that can help you out a lot. The actions, it completely varies. To earn money playing in public, it requires anywhere from an evening's work to a full day's performance at the DM's discretion. And it also says a bard's special performance-based abilities are described in the class description. So we would have to go back to bardic stuff for how bardic stuff is. Try again. Yes, retries are allowed, but they don't negate previous failures, and an audience that has been unimpressed in the past is likely to be prejudiced in future performances, which means the DC you're beating increases by 2 for each successive failure. So if you thought beating a DC 10 was hard just for pretty much a begging action, failing it could turn into a 12. Or if you think a 30 is too high, failing it would easily put it to a 32. Specials, a bard, pretty much right there it says a bard must have at least 3 ranks in a perform check to use its inspired courage for its allies, or its counter song, or its fascinating ability. Because it pretty much literally goes into a bard needs this amount of ranks to do this, that. So it's 3 for the first bardic performances, 6 for the next, then 9, then 12, then 15, then 18, and then 21. So it's like a so when I say a bard that doesn't have a specific performance with enough ranks in it, not total modifier, ranks, then the bard may be able to get take. I'm level 18, but I only have 3 ranks in my perform stringed instrument, so I may be level 18, but I can only use first level, pretty much the starting bardic songs. So it's a way that when a player hinders themselves by not doing what is correct. Uh, yeah. In addition to using perform skill, you can entertain people with sleight of hand, tumbling, tightrope, walking, and spells, especially illusion ones. So there is other skills that you can use to try to entertain people. Like if you're trying to do a performance around pickpocketing, you use sleight of hand, and it's not about technically keeping what you steal from people because you're entertaining it. So it's kind of like one of those performances you see on stage where a person's talking to a random audience member, shaking hands and stuff, they pat on shoulders, and then going, "Oh, hey, is this watch yours? Is this wallet yours? Is this your car keys?" Uh, Tumbling is pretty much falling. You would have to look up this. I can't think of how to properly explain it right now. Tightrope walking is self-explanatory. You're walking on ropes. Spells, especially illusion spells, is using illusions to make images, like shadow puppets. You can use illusions for shadow puppets. If you're trying to do a proper reenacting of an epic poem or an epic story, you can use illusions to help set the atmosphere. Because you can use the illusions to mimic uh, not as scary, because again some monsters will scare peasants away and you're doing the opposite of what you want, but you can use them to make slightly less versions of, let's say, Displacer Beast. Make it look like a more friendlier kitty so people aren't so terrified of it, so they're watched. But you can use that to better set the scene with other illusion sound spells and stuff like that to better set the scene so your performance goes up. Even if the people know you're using illusions, it still helps. The next skill is a skill that is actually, believe it or not, rarely used. It is trained only, so you can't just profession your way out of everything, and it is somewhat specific to whatever your profession is. And it simply says, like craft, knowledge, and perform profession is actually a number of separate skills. For instance, you could have the skill profession cook. Your ranks in this skill don't affect any profession profession mill or profession minor checks. You might. Why is it worded like that? Your ranks in this skill don't affect any profession miller or profession minor checks you might make. You could have several profession skills, each with its own rank, each purchased separately. Does profession minor, miller, and cook are separate ones. While craft skill represents the ability to create or making an item, a profession skill represents an aptitude in a faction requiring a border range of less specific knowledges. To draw a modern analogy, if an occupation is a service industry, it's probably a profession skill. If it is a manufacturing sector, it's probably a craft. So, craft, you could take profession cook, and it's not necessarily like how much food you cook or anything. It's you're rolling it to see pretty much how much people you can feed with it and how good you're actually able to make that thing because it's a job. So you can say it's a job check. Uh, when it goes into check, you can practice your trade and make a decent living, earning about half your profession check result in gold pieces per week of dedicated work. You know how to use the tools of your trade, how to perform a profession's daily tasks, how to supervise helpers, and how to handle common problems. For example, a sailor knows how to tie various basic knots, how to tend and repair sails, and how to stand a deck watch at sea. DM sets DCs for specific specialized tasks. Action not applicable. A single check generate represents a week, or generally represents an entire week's worth of work. So once you make it, you're pretty much set for the week as long as you're doing it for that week. Try again as varies. Attempts to use a profession check to earn an income cannot be retried. You are stuck with whatever weekly wages your check results brought you. Another check may be made after a week to determine a new income for that period of time. An attempt to accomplish some specific task can usually be retried, like tying a rope. If you're tying a rope and you mess up with the first one, it's pretty obvious you messed up. There's ways to checking that, so you can try again. But if you're doing this a normal sailing check, you can't retry that because you're doing it to make money. So that week's or that roll represents a week of whatever you did, and it can be either really good or really bad. And it specifically states that it's half your profession check result. That does not mean like, oh, I have a +5 to my check, so I'm only making two gold. No, it specifically says half your check result. So if you get, let's say, a 23, which is rounded down, because D&D likes to round things down. A 23 divided by 2 rounded down as an 11. So right there within that week, you make 11 gold pieces. They may not sound like a lot of gold pieces to the common person, but when it comes to making normal income checks, because again, you're not raiding a dragon's hoard or defeating some evil wizard that has countless hundreds of thousands of gold pieces, you're doing a normal day-to-day job. Ride check can be easy or complicated. It all depends on how specific the DM wants to be with it, but in general, the rules are follow. As I said, you can ride a horse like a mount, a riding dog, a griffin, a dragon, or some other type of creature suitable for riding. You can attempt to ride check will ride a creature that is ill-suited as a mount, such as a bipedal creature. You take a -5 penalty on ride checks. There is a lot of DMs that would go, oh, it's bipedal, not quadruped, bipedal being 2 legs, quad being 4, because it states that right there that a bipedal creature is not suitable as a mount. You're taking a -5 checks to all your ride check penalties. My rule with that, and you can take this or leave this, is if the bipedal creature is something that's specifically been trained and technically mostly bred to be utilized in such a way as a mount, then you don't need to have that penalty despite it being bipedal. For instance, chocobos. If you're throwing chocobos in the world, they are, in the source material they come from, they are used as racing mounts. Cavalry mounts. They are used all across the board as mounts. Because even though they may be bipedal, that's their lore is as mounts. So that thing can be removed. The typical riding actions don't require a check. So if you're just doing a normal riding, just like you can saddle, mount, ride, and dismount from a mount without a problem. It's the following ones that technically do take some sort of check, and we can go in specifics for them there. There's guide with knees, 5. Stay in saddle, 5, because yes, you can end up falling out of your saddle. Fight with a warhorse, as in you're fighting while on it. You need to beat a DC 10. Cover, safe fall, leap, or spur mount are all 15. Control mount in battle, or fast mount or fast dismount, DC 20s, with the mounts as dismount 1, which is armor check penalties apply. So if you're wearing full plate's a -6. So when you're trying to quickly get on or off, -6, so you can end up falling off. It does go into the examples of what each one of the things are, like guide with knees. It's like you react instantly to guide your mount with your knees, so that way you can use both your hands in combat. Stay in saddles mainly to not fall off. It's because if the mount bolts and or rears, or when you take damage, and it doesn't normally take an action, as a DM's being a wee bit mean with it. So if you get smacked or it bolts or rears, you have to stay in the saddle. Fight with warhorse. If you direct your war-trained mount to attack in combat, you still make your own attacks or attacks normally. This is a free action, but it's pretty much it's getting your mount to do its attacks. And again, it specifically says war trained. If your mount is not combat trained, for instance, a riding horse, you're not getting it to fight. It doesn't want to fight. It doesn't want to stay in combat. It wants to leave combat because it's not combat trained. Because it's not a war beast, it's a riding beast. Cover, you can instantly drop down and hang aside your mount, using it as cover. You can't attack or cast spells while doing the cover, while using it as cover. If you fail your ride check, you don't get the cover benefit. This use does not take an action, so you can still technically do stuff that doesn't involve combat, but you're pretty much using your mount as cover. That sounds good and all until whatever's trying to hit you decides to hit your horse instead, because, well, you can't use it for cover if it's, well, dead. Safe fall is you can try to take no damage when you fall off the mount, which is pretty much when it's killed or when it falls. For example, if you fail your ride check, you take a die 6 penalty of fall damage. So you can end up not hurting yourself while the horse goes down or while you're falling off it. Leaping is action to get it to leap. And it helps that not actually get hurt while leaping, because it can take a die 6 points of damage for doing this. And that's, you mainly see it nowadays with show horses trying to jump over things. Spur mount is when you try to get it to go temporarily faster for one round. So if you pass a check, you can get it to go 10 feet faster for one round, but it takes 1 point of damage. And that comes from the original action of riders used to have these on the back of their riding boots. Not generic boots, but riding boots. There's this piece of metal that somewhat can spin on it that has little pointy parts. Those are spurs. The spur mount thing comes from the fact that you technically are hitting the thigh of the horse or around that general area when you back kick it to get it to go, because that shout of pain kicks it into action. Control mount in combat. As a move action, you can attempt to scroll a light horse, pony, heavy horse, or other mounts not trained for combat while riding it in battle. Because again, you do not need to do this roll for pretty much war horses or war ponies because they're trained in combat. Non-combat trained mounts, you can't make that check. Well, I can't make that. You have to make this check, which again, it's not a low check, and that's just to get cooperate in combat so you can actually do your combat. Because again, it wants to flee, it wants to run, it doesn't want to fight. That is something a lot of people don't get because they're like, I'm going to get the cheaper riding horse, and then they ride it into combat. It's like, no, you need to do a ride check. Just to get it to go into combat with you. And it's one of those things that it's not going to want to stay in combat. So it's like, your horse wants to flee. Call it a coward all you want. It doesn't want to do that. There's that it tells you how fast you can get on or out off a mount, and pretty much what happens if you fall, which is pretty self-explanatory. What's not there's the main thing is if you fail the fast dismount check, then you dismount normally. Actions varies. Mounting or dismounting normally is a move action. Other checks are a move action, free action, or no action. If you're riding bareback, you take a -5 penalty, which is cumulative with you're riding something that's not suitable as a mount and you're riding bareback, that's a -10, so it's really hard to do it. Military saddle gives you a +2 on ride checks relating to staying in the saddle. Not all ride checks, but just in the saddle. So the action of I don't want to fall off because I've been hit by damage, that helps with. The riding skill is a prerequisite for feats such as mounted archery, mounted combat, ride by, attacks, spiritual charge, or trample. So those mount-related feats require you to actually have stuff in ride. So you can't take those and not have anything in ride. They work together. Synergy bonus, you do get a +2 because of +2 in ride because of 5 ranks or more in handle animals. So the better you are at handling animals, the better you are with it. And a big thing to remember is if a DM is not requiring you to do a ride check to perform an action, either A, go when you go to do it, like either A, let it slide, because if he's going to let it slide, or B, go, okay, because this action I got a 19. Did I pass that ride check? Because that right there verifies if he's going to go, okay, let me double check. Okay, so that way he says yes or no. Or if he goes, oh, I'm not going to require you to do that check because he doesn't believe you need to. So if a DM is not constantly throwing the DCs at you, do not ruin it for everyone else. Rules lawyers and people who want to keep strictly to the books, which is Prince Rules lawyers, will constantly go, that's a DC 20 to fast D mount. You can't do it because you didn't make the check. Those type of people will ruin it for everyone. Just even though it is good to play by the book, a thing to remember, and I'll probably say this in future episodes, if and when a DM decides to not force checks, to not require you to do anything, don't sit there and start an argument with it. Just go, okay, you may not agree with it, But you have to remember, not all DMs are the same. Some DMs will force these, some won't. Just don't fight with him. Just take the win, because that's all that is you taking a win. Take the big W. Uh, that being said, this will be the end of the episode. Thank you for watching today's episode of Out of State DMing. Please tune in next week for we'll go over more skills because we still have more skills left. Remember to like and subscribe, and thank you for watching.